Hi, I'm Bonni Goldberg on the Strategic Authorpreneur podcast, and today we're going to talk about how I re-released my traditionally published book as an indie title.
Hey there, Strategic Authorpreneurs. I'm Crystal Hunt.
And I'm Michela Mitrani. We are here to help you save time, money, and energy as you level up your writing career.
Welcome to episode 20 of the Strategic Authorpreneur podcast. On today's show, we're talking with author Bonni Goldberg about the process of taking back rights to one of your books that has been traditionally published and republishing it as an indie title. Before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about what we've been up to this week. So, what are you working on?
I've been working on a couple of different projects, Crystal, I have to admit. But at the same time, in between projects, I always make sure that I read something and I make sure that I recommend you something that I think might be of value. This time, before diving in what I've been up to, I want to suggest the listeners and viewers an article about writing. So it's not necessarily about only the business side of things. This one is going to be more on the writing kind of things. And it is by Hugh Howey, and the title, if you can see it on YouTube, is The Tao of Writing a Novel. So you can already see it's like something a bit more on the philosophical kind of things, but there are a lot of very useful suggestions that Hugh, which is a science fiction author, gives. And I just love this article because it's very genuine, and it basically makes you realize how you can actually take from the Eastern philosophy and you can apply it to your own writing. And it's very empowering. It's something that really gives you permission to write the things that you want to write, but at the same time doing it following the craft. So don't think of it just as an art, think of it as something that you can be better and get better at it day after day. So I really recommend this article. It's short, it's sweet, but it's like as I like to say, it's a punch in the face, especially if you are at one of these moments you're a bit down, maybe. It's also motivational. So I highly recommend this article, The Tao of Writing a Novel, by Hugh Howey. And what I've been up to a couple of different things. One is I'm happy to announce that 50% of my 12 by 20 challenge is completed. And I'm now working toward the second part of the challenge, where I really try, Krista, to understand what I did in the first part with writing wise, crafting wise, and trying to make really a work that stands by itself and can maybe in the future I can use for something like a product, more like a product. So for the selling kind of thing. So I now wrote 6 stories in 6 months, and in my books I have no excuses anymore. I need to be a bit more daring, and if that means like writing something a bit outside of my comfort zone, this is the moment, because like I feel like now I'm I'm in school, I'm learning still. So if I have to do a big mistake, it's better to do it now when I'm giving stories for free. And once somebody told me there are no stupid questions when you are in school yet. The thing is, you can do damage to yourself if you don't learn from that part of your journey, of your learning journey, and just go outside there. You didn't try, you didn't learn your things, and just go outside and you do your mistakes. In that case, they have real consequences. So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited actually about knowing what you have been up to.
Well, all of that talk about mailing lists on last week's episode got me kind of reviewing some stuff, and I have been working on moving my fiction list over the last couple stages from MailerLite to SendFox, and just making sure that everything is all good there, and doing a bit of a makeover at the same time with my onboarding, which of course leads into updating the website, which of course leads into, oh yeah, I changed a bunch of covers. And so just really refreshing everything in advance of a big kind of push for the fall. So I have been, really doing a bit of revisioning. And so the main things I've been using for that, I love Scapple for doing some outlining of a mailing list onboarding sequence. And Scapple is made by the same folks who make Scrivener. The company's called Literature and Latte. And it's a very affordable tool. I think it's maybe $20 now for a lifetime license. I think I bought it a few years ago. It was like $12. And it's a forever license, so you only pay once. And it's a sort of mind mapping or mapping tool. So you can do really visual layouts. It's the equivalent of putting sticky notes on my wall or coloring in a notebook, but it lets me map out the reader journey and what all the emails are going to have and how things lead into other automation sequences, because it's impossible to keep it all straight in my head. So, and then I don't remember when I come back 6 months later to review everything and do an update. It's really hard to remember exactly what you set up and why. So I was using Scapple to map everything out, SendFox to get it all set up, BookFunnel to set up delivering of the cookies that are offered in there, and then using the second half of the Sell Like Crazy book by Sabri Subi, which I have digitally. And it just talks about the funnel and sales onboarding and the welcome sequence order and what you should have in that to make sure that deliverability criteria are being met as well. So that was really what I've been up to this past week. It's been a pretty heavy on the business side of the writing world stuff, and just making sure that everything is all good to go. Another thing that's very important on the businessy side of stuff is reviews. You know how important those are in the book world. So the podcast world is exactly the same thing. We would be forever grateful if you'd leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to this after the episode and let us know what you think. And without further ado, let's dive into our interview with author Bonni Goldberg and see what she has to say about republishing your back catalog. We'll be back after the interview to break it all down for you. So we are here today with Bonni Goldberg, who is the author of Room to Write, a fantastic book of writing prompts to kick you into gear and get you out of that writing slump. Bonni, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what kinds of other things you write? Because I know that's not the only thing that you do.
No, it's not. Actually, my background, I started as a writer. I came in through the avenue of poetry, which is a very rarefied place to begin, and have a master's degree in creative writing from Johns Hopkins from many, many moons ago. And basically, I hit my early-ish, mid-ish 30s and realized that I really needed to get something published besides a poem here or there, or a couple of poems, and decided that I needed to figure out what could I write quickly with I didn't have to research, and with a poet's brain, which means, keeping things kind of short. And what I came up with was actually Room to Write. And that was the first nonfiction writing I did outside of little essays and things that I'd written in the past. And I sold that book fairly quickly. And that is how I began thinking of myself as more than just a poet, or not only a poet. And from there, I wrote a lot of nonfiction for adults. And that led me to be looking at other things that were interesting to me. I had a child, and then I started writing children's literature, middle grade and picture books. And that's pretty much how it went from the beginning.
So you've had a nicely varied writing career and touched in a whole bunch of different genres, which I think is a really interesting way to do it, to explore all those different pieces and kind of see what feels like the right fit. But it is kind of unusual to have that first sort of book experience to take off right out of the gate. And I remember picking up a copy of Room to Write and being very impressed by the quote on the cover. You had a pretty impressive blurb on that one.
I did. That was Julia Cameron. It's still on the cover because it still counts. The reason that that happened is because Julia was also a writer at the same publishing company. That book was traditionally published first, and Julia had just written before mine came out the Writer's Way, and so she was not difficult to contact. I didn't contact her. The publishers were like, "Hey, Julia, will you please blurb this book?" And she really did like it, and she was like, "Sure." So that was one of those advantages that comes with traditional publishing, is that you do have some kind of extra access to the other writers that are part of that publishing house.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what brought you from that experience into your current reality, which is you have just re released Room to Write as an indie published title? So, tell us a bit about that adventure.
Sure. Well, before I start on that, I just want to say that you mentioned earlier that it was kind of unusual to be going from genre to genre like this, and it was extremely unusual back when I was first writing. In fact, it was called jumping shelves, and it was a terrible thing to do if you wanted to have a career as a writer. So jumping shelves is essentially going from genre to genre because it's very hard to build an audience and readership and have people go quickly to buy the next book from you if you keep changing your subject matter and you even change your genre. So that was something that I had to really accept about myself. And I had different times of my life when I was more or less accepting of that. And so, in that spirit, as publishing changed and indie publishing became more of a popular, normalized, almost mainstream thing to do, I realized that there were a lot of books and subject areas that I would love to write about that didn't necessarily have the same size audience as would be necessary to be able to interest a traditional publisher. And that doesn't mean, though, that those things aren't important to those readerships or that I didn't want to reach those readerships. And so I became very interested in the indie publishing world. And I had a few forays with journal books. So these are books that are basically based on a particular topic and using journaling with prompts as a way to get deeper and broader and have more insight. And so I did a few of those, which was a very different experience than republishing Room to Write. And it was very hands off in a certain way, much more so than with Room to Write. And so there I was with those books out, but still not really feeling like I had it down, the indie publishing part. Those were only paperback books. They were not done in ebooks. The whole thing, I feel like I'm technologically challenged. And so that was extremely intimidating to me. What happened was that I was encouraged by a particular fan of Room to Write, who we both know, to republish it. And it had not occurred to me until then, but it was true that back in the day when Room to Write was originally published, people weren't publishing ebooks. And so there never was an ebook. There never was that option.
Right. And so people talk about, in an abstract sense, when you get the rights back to your book, you can republish it on your own as an indie. But I don't think that necessarily people know what that means when you get your rights back. I think it's kind of this amorphous concept. So
Yes.
what do you physically get? What happens? What comes back to you? And what do you have to work with that kind of a situation?
Well, for me, nothing. So to get your rights back, you have to ask for them. So the first thing is going back to the publisher and sending them an email saying, I'd like to have the rights back to my book. And then that can take a really long time, which it did for me. And I had to keep bugging them about it because imprints get moved to other imprints and publishing companies buy up other publishing companies. And this book was over 20 years old. So there was a lot about it that made it more obscure to find and get the right people involved. But what it essentially entailed was me getting an email saying, yeah, we're giving you the rights back. And I think I actually may have gotten a paper letter, like a snail mail letter as well. And it basically gave me back the rights. And that's it. there was no file. I mean, if there had been a file, it was probably like on a floppy disk or some technology that we just don't even think about anymore. So I basically got permission to use the material in any way that I wanted to now. That didn't mean the cover or the interior design or any of the other aspects of the book, but the actual material itself.
So then what? So
So,
you've got this permission letter, and basically a hard copy of your published book, one assumes, on a bookshelf somewhere. Then what do you do?
so then you panic.
Yes, absolutely.
And then you figure it out. So the first thing I needed to do was get this hardcover, well, it wasn't hardcover, but this paperback book into electronic form. And I'm not a fast typer, and I'm not a whiz with anything. And I also have a limited budget. So I found this company called Blue Leaf online, and they will actually, you can send them your physical book, and they will scan it into and make it into a document. I mean, I don't even have a scanner. That's how low tech that I am, right? So I sent them a physical copy of this book, and after a couple of few weeks, they sent me a zip file with the book scanned. Now, I don't know if you remember, but you probably do remember that Room to Write was really heavily designed. The interior was heavily formatted. And so what I ended up with was a file, but not one that could be easily transformed into a Word doc to then turn into an ebook. So the next piece was having to find somebody who would then take that very formatted version and retype it as a Word doc. And I used Upwork for that. I found a very good person in another country who was willing to do that for the price that I had in my budget. And that gave me a now working Word document that I could use. I was lucky in the fact that it was already an edited book, right? So a lot of that work had already been done. A wonderful friend of mine, the same fan of that book, offered to read through it just to see if there were any things that got messed up between the scanning and the putting it into a Word doc. And so she went through that and made changes. And then I went through it one more time. And then when I had what I thought was as clean a copy as I possibly could, the next step was to get a cover. So for the cover, I found a really great company, what's called 100covers.com, and they were having a great half price sale. So I snapped that up and I hired them to do the cover, which they did a great job.
It's
And the
gorgeous.
font,
Yeah, it's a fantastic
I love the cover. I love my old cover because actually my old cover was drawn by my husband. He was the cover illustrator. That's a whole nother story. So it was going to be a big deal to find a new cover that I liked, and they did a terrific job. I really do love the cover. And then everything was all together except for the fact that the cover and the Word document had to be put together into a ebook document. And for that, I got a referral to the lovely Jackie Nelson, and I paid her to do that process, and voila, I had an ebook.
Excellent. And so for somebody who's not saying they're not very technical, I feel like that's a lot of steps that you went through, and you must have learned some interesting things along the way. So was there anything that really surprised you about the process, or that you learned about yourself by doing all of these steps?
Well, I learned that I could move through a lot of my anxiety and worry because it really was so daunting to me. The whole process just seemed like it was going to be insurmountable because of course it wasn't just putting everything together that I just explained. It was then actually launching the book. And that is a whole nother group of things that I had never done and needed to do and had read a lot about and listened to a lot of things about, but hadn't actually done it myself. So I think I learned something that I already knew, but I really got it on another level. And that is that the secret is really chunking things down and asking for help and giving things a try. On one level, I was prepared to pay for things I couldn't do. And in the creation of the ebook, I did pay. That's what I did. I did pay professionals to do the work. It wasn't terribly expensive, but it was an output. And I was working on having the same kind of budget for launching the book. And it turned out that I was able to do a lot of the things that I would never have imagined that I could do in that process. And I do strongly believe that it was being empowered by doing the pieces that had to do with making the book that gave me some of the confidence or the willingness to give it a try when it was time to launch the book.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point, which is that sort of desensitization in a
Mhm.
sense that everything seems terrifying and new and unfamiliar when you're not really sure what you're doing or how to go about it. But once you dig in and start breaking things down and have a little bit of a roadmap, and then you realize, okay, well, I just did those 5 steps and I'm still here and everything is fine. The world hasn't crumbled.
Mhm.
Okay, well, let's add one more and then one more. Um, so now, having done this, would you do it again?
I will do it again. Yes, I have plans. It is going to happen again. I have a second writing book that came out several years after Room to Write, and that will be the next project that I will go from. And I'll have to do it exactly the same way because I don't have it in any kind of file form because it's that old. And so that's also has already actually gone to Blue Leaf and that's been taken care of. And then I will find my Upwork person and go through the same process all over. But before I do that, the next phase, and which I hope will be done by the time people hear this and see it, is that I'm going to also release Room to Write in its new lovely cover as a paperback again because as a book what it does and what it's about is something that a lot of people have said to me they really would love to have a hard copy of. Ebooks are terrific and it was a much quicker process to bring it out as an ebook, but I think there's still value in a physical copy for a book like this.
Yeah, with any kind of prompt book, it's nice to be able to dip in and out of it and just pick it
Yes,
up and open to any page you want. And yeah, you can jump around with your e-reader, but it really isn't the same. So
it's not.
I will be very excited to grab a copy of that when it hits the
Yay.
stands, as the kids say. Or I guess not the kids, the opposite of the kids. Um, okay, so here's a question for you. If
Okay.
you could go back in time and give your past self some advice to make your current self's job easier, what would you say?
I would say a couple of things. One, I would say give yourself a little more time. And the other thing I would say is write it all down what you did and how you did it. And not only write it down, but put it all in the same place. So I didn't do that. And so it is going to make doing this again that much harder. Although I do know how to do it now and I have my resources and I do know where those live. But I think that it's always, and I even said to myself, I started making a list and keeping track. And the way I got myself to do it was to say, somebody else is going to need this. So let me put it all together and then I can give it to people. And that was enough incentive to get me going. But I had a pretty short turnaround time that I had given myself. And so I think that I might have been better at keeping up with keeping track of what I was doing if I hadn't been so time crunched. So, time and attention to keeping track of what I'm doing. I think that's great advice for every writerpreneur, and no matter what they do, because we aren't always, even with my jumping shelves, I'm still doing a lot of the same things over and over again in the publication process. And so I think that really helps.
That documentation part is key for sure because yeah, no matter how well we know the things we think we are doing, it doesn't matter. Every time we do it is like relearning it all over again. And if you have a record of where did you launch the last book? Which of the promotion sites did you use? What was effective? It just makes it so much easier for your future self, for sure. So, okay, if we go way back in time, like,
Okay.
is there anything you could have done or might have done differently along the way? Like, we go way back to when your book was originally published, something you would have kept or something you would have done differently to make it easier when you did get the rights back. Can you think of anything that would have made that process easier?
I mean, it would have been probably a better move as a career move to be more in touch, more consistently in touch with the publishers, just because, keeping part of the network in the community. I wish that I had been a little more savvy around the internet and what was going on because I think I missed a big, giant old opportunity to keep that book more alive than it was. Lots of people have the book, the old version, but it's a really old version. And I think I could have gotten some momentum and even a new fan base and really grown an audience for it if I had done that kind of thing. But this is the piece, right? At the time, I was busy with the next book and the next passion, and I didn't have a sense of how to do the kinds of things that we do now. So I don't really have any regrets or ideas of things I should have done differently in creating the book. I really feel great about it. There were very, very few edits and changes that I made in the new edition. There were some things that were I had to I had to sort of revise based on the way technology has changed and the kind of references that I was making. But the rest of it, I really have a soft spot, a love for that first book. And it really is, even then, it really felt to me like I was writing the sort of 2.0 or 3.0 version of the writing prompt book. Not that I knew what 2.0 or 3.0 meant back then, but I was, but I know now. But I was really writing something that was going to be valuable for people over and over again, and not just, okay, I've tried that writing prompt and now I'm done. And that's why I called them writing studies, because they are studies. They're not just something to sit down and write. You can go back to them, and they're developed in such a way to encourage you to do that.
Excellent. And now you had mentioned earlier that you did a few things as part of a soft launch for the ebook to kind of get things rolling. Can you tell us a little bit more about which things you included in your plan?
Sure, I sure can. So I got a small street team of readers who would read and review, so that when the book became available, there'd be reviews out there. And I also had a small budget that I used to do the KDP promo. So I put the book for my hard launch, I guess, my first launch. I put it on at 99 cents, and I had maybe 4 or 5 book promotion sites that uh, featured it or listed it or whatever they do. They all do different things in order to get some attention to the book. So that worked out really well. And I had really good sales during that week. And other than that, the reviews and the promos, I think that was mostly what I did to get things going. I also was planned uh, the launch to coincide with a remote writers conference that was going on, and so I could also get some energy and some momentum from there. And then later on, there was another writing conference kind of thing going on. This is all happening kind of a little bit before and during COVID start. Um, that I then took the book back down to another low price, not 99 cents, but I think I did it at $1.99 or $2.99 to also create some momentum around that. So I did try to think about when it was launching, so that I would have some built-in reasons and ways of getting more people connected to
Excellent. And if people are looking to connect with you online, where can they do that? And where
Oh,
can
they
they
should
buy
do
Room
that.
to Write?
Oh, you can buy Room to Write on Amazon. And as I said, I hope by the time you hear this, you'll be able to choose between the ebook and the paperback, and that you'll really want both, of course. And you can connect with me on Facebook. So I'm at Bonni Goldberg Books, Bonni Goldberg Books, BonniGoldberg Books. And that's the best place to come to talk with me. And I'm really happy to have people there. I am on Instagram and I am on Twitter. I'm oddly on Twitter. I think I'm on Twitter as Bonni Goldberg, but I'm oddly on Instagram as Goldberg Bonni. Not really sure how that happened, folks, but that's how I am. And I have a lot of joy when people connect with me. Sometimes I have people who have been working with Room to Write, and they'll email me or they'll connect with me, and I always want to know what your favorite prompt was and what you're using it for. So please, I love that. I love that connection. I'm also someone that's in education, and so it's all about that connection for me and hearing what works, what doesn't for the next project. The choice to take back your rights, well, not to take back your rights, but the choice to publish something indie that was traditionally published.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
because I think that's a really interesting question as to, why would you do that and when would you do that? So I didn't think about doing this at all on my own, but I was prompted by other people, by people from the Creative Academy and by several people going, "Oh, you're that Bonni Goldberg, that one, the one that wrote that one," and so it wasn't in my mind. And the reason that I felt like I could do it is because it's a very evergreen book. This is something, a writing book of writing prompts. This is something that is really never going to go out of fashion. There's always going to be writers, and there's always going to be people who enjoy that kind of additional support and resource to be out there. So I knew that it would be something that was viable. And I think because the next one is a writing book, I think that'll also be viable. I do have another book that I also own the rights to that is from an entirely different topic. And I've been back and forth about bringing that one out, republishing it, because I think that it is something that would be really valuable to have out there, but I don't think there's going to be as big an audience, or maybe I'm just not willing to do the work involved in finding that audience and letting them know about it. But I do think it's a really interesting question to ask yourself if you have published traditionally, if you have something that you think is going to have impact now in a different format and maybe with a different cover. And it's such a great way to start on the journey of indie publishing and ebook publishing, because it's already done on a lot of levels. You don't have to get it completely edited. You don't have to wonder if it's something that is of the quality that you might want it to be published. There's already a cover. So that means you have some really strong feelings about that. Like, I loved this part, I don't like that part. And so you're coming to it with already an amount of knowledge and sense of it that maybe is not always there when you're doing this for the first time with just a brand new book, with a brand new project. So using an older project can really be a great way. It's a great entry into this process. So I do encourage people to think of it that way. And I think it was really valuable for me. It's been really valuable for me. And I will probably always want to be both traditionally published and indie published, because in the writing of the younger children's books, I think it's going to be necessary for me to be traditionally published for a lot of reasons. And I still want to be able to write what I want, when I want, and put it out into the world. So that is why I am so delighted that there is this indie publishing available now in such a way that has become very mainstream and really acceptable and beyond acceptable, but really brilliant. It's bringing out voices for people that were not able to have their voice out there. And it's giving us subjects and perspectives on subjects that we also couldn't necessarily have otherwise, because a traditional publisher always is first and foremost need to be concerned about keeping the electricity on and paying bills and health insurance and all of those things. And so if they can't publish it with the idea that enough people are going to buy it, that there's a big enough audience, it's just not going to happen. And now there is that opportunity for even a small group of people that really need to hear what you have to say, the way you have to say it, or want to be entertained in the way that you can entertain them. You can do that now. And that's powerful. It's tremendously powerful. It's really all about what writing is about, which is the conversation and the conversation that we're all having, the sort of communal conversation on all different kinds of topics and in all different kinds of ways. So I think as a writer, it's really important to be participating in the indie writing world. And even if I could have all my books done traditionally, I wouldn't.
And that's an interesting thing to ponder, which is, I was going to say, how do you think this changes the way you write, knowing that you have two options? Or do you feel like it changes the way you write?
No, I don't feel like it changes the way I write, but that's because I am a writer who, from the very beginning, understood about myself that I was going to write from my passion, whatever interests me, whatever I think is important, because I don't think that I'm terminally unique, right? If I'm interested in it, chances are other people are interested in it too. And these are the people I want to have a conversation with. When I was only traditionally published, then I had to write a book proposal that my agent had to believe was going to be marketable. And then it was up to a lot of other people whether or not that was going to be made available to others. And that, like I said, I understand why that is, but that was limiting. I have a couple of manuscripts that I wrote back then, or proposals that never saw the light of day because they just weren't going to, have enough of an audience to make it economically a smart move. And now I don't have to worry about that. But I'm also someone who doesn't write to market. I jump shelves. I'm on in all different topics. And that is me. I'm kind of a butterfly in that way, that I flit. And for a long time, I felt badly about that. Like that was a failing of mine. Like, oh, I'm never going to be able to make a career of writing because I can't stay in one genre and one idea, and I won't ever be able to build up an audience. And, to some extent, that's true. I don't have a full-time life as a writer, but I do have the joy and the interest, and I do have an audience, and I have a lot of the pieces that matter most to me. And I also have health insurance from my job.
Which is an important combination, I think.
Well, when you're the main breadwinner in your family, yes, it really, really is. And, if I didn't have that kind of security, I don't think I would have the presence of mind to do the writing that I really want to do, or be brave enough to say some of the things I want to say. And and at the same time, my job does mean that I have a full-time job. So that means that I can't devote as much time as I want to writing. But here's the trick about me. And this is only me. This is not anybody else. If I didn't have to work, if I didn't have to be in the world in that way, that tethers me to reality, that tethers me to what the other people in the world are dealing with and going through, I would not be as good a writer. I really believe that. So for me, it is, I do need both. And I think that one feeds the other. And I think that that's not everybody. Certainly, it's not everybody. But I have come to accept and be comfortable with the fact that it's me, and that's okay.
And I think it is a really important contributing piece to your ability to climb the mountain of indie publishing and to figure out those things along the way, which in some cases meant hiring somebody that it makes sense. If you have the opportunity to work and you can set aside enough budget to have a bit of a budget for your project, then it does unlock some of those doors. And it does mean that you don't have to learn everything yourself. And with a limited number of hours in the day, if going to work for X number of hours a week can fund your life and your home and your family and have a little bit extra to put into your book publishing fund, then that does, as you said, give you the freedom to make the best choice for you. And it stops you from stalling out, because when you need the help, you feel like you have the opportunity of getting it in hiring people and having a hand along the way whenever you need it, which is really powerful. I think this dream of let's just go full time and just write and do that 100% of the time puts a lot of pressure on the art, as you said, and it makes us make choices we might not make otherwise if it wasn't so much pressure on what we're doing. So letting things unfold a little bit organically can be a really powerful and important piece of the longevity of a writing career as well, because you can burn out pretty quick when there's too much pressure and everything stops being fun pretty fast if you make that leap from passion to full-time job. It changes the way you kind of approach everything, which can take some of the joy out of it. So
it does change everything. And another thing that happened for me was when I was being traditionally published. Yeah, this is an important piece. When I was being traditionally published, I didn't want to write anything that I wasn't going to get paid for. Like, I didn't want to take the time out of my life to write something if I wasn't going to get paid for it, because now I was getting paid for it. And so that was, why do anything else? And so the way my mind, I think, was working was, what am I interested in that I could also write a book about?
right.
A whole book, and a nonfiction book, and all of these other pieces to it. And so it does impact you in terms of what you do and how you do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to have a career, a full-time career as a writer, you have to do that. That is part of a job. And it doesn't mean that your writing isn't wonderful and powerful and valuable. It's just a different way of relating to the work that you're doing and the relationship to that. And now, when I first published those journals, the paperback journals, those were based on subjects and areas and things that I wanted to put out there, and I could just do that. And they have small audiences. Some of them have no audiences, but the ones that do, that's really helpful for those people. The poet Sharon Olds said once that she thought of it that everybody has the poets that they love. So every poet will have an audience of, I forget the number, 5,000 people. And that really the job of the poet is to find those people. And she said she didn't worry about dying and no longer writing her poetry, because other people would come and they would pick up the people that were her audience, and everybody would have their poets. And in the same way, that's how I feel very much about writing, is that there's an audience, our audience, and we're looking for them and we're finding them and they're finding us, and that's a beautiful thing.
Nice. That's a lovely way to think of it. Is there anything else we want to add?
I feel like it's a little weird because it is your other thing, but I do want to say that one of the things that I didn't have back when I first published Room to Write and was writing traditionally is I did not have a writing community. And the thing I believe that really allowed me to do this project, to go from being completely overwhelmed to chunking it down and doing it, was the Creative Academy, was having a community where I could reach out, where I had a weekly accountability group to talk with, where I knew I could get the help that I needed, the questions answered, and the anxiety or I could get the support to not let the anxiety get the better of me. And I just can't stress enough that writing is not it is a team sport. Writing is a team sport. And anyone who tells you that it isn't is lying to you, straight out. Is lying. It is a collaborative effort, and I'll tell you honestly, the thing I loved the most, the hands down most wonderful thing about being traditionally published was the collaboration. The editor who was so interested in every word that I said in my writing, like the only other person that was that interested as I was in those words, and the artists and designers working on the cover, and all the pieces that brought it together. It's not just words on paper. It's a lot more than that. And having a community as an indie writer, indie published writer, I don't know how anybody does it without that community. And even if they do, they're struggling unnecessarily. So I really, if there was one takeaway, is a community of other writers who are at different phases of the process than you are, from beginning before you and after you, and well on their way, is invaluable. And accountability group is invaluable. There's really nothing like it, and it is something that I hope for every single person that is on the journey, the creative journey, whether it's through art, writing, dance, whatever it is.
Well, for anybody out there who does not have their own writing community yet, we would love for you to join us in the Creative Academy. You can come and say hi. Bonni and I hang out there all the time. Michaela is around there as well. We'll be in very good company. We have a lovely, lovely and large group of writers, actually. So you'll be able to find people who write in your genre and who are at a similar stage, and a really nice array of folks in there. So the link will be in the show notes to the Creative Academy, and also to Bonni's website and Bonni's social media stuff. So if you're looking to connect with Bonni, you can find our show notes and click on some of those links we have. There will also, of course, be a link to Room to Write in all of the editions that are available as the date this airs. And all that's left to say, I think, is thank you, Bonni, so much for coming and spending time with us today and talking about your exciting publishing adventure. We will be looking forward to checking in with you again at a future date when you've got a few more books out as well.
Thank you, Crystal. This has been a pleasure.
Okay, we are back, and the interview with Bonni was really interesting. There are a couple of things that I found really useful, not only for the writing side of things, but especially for the keeping track of things that we do as writers and that we can use later on in our writer's journey. And there was one thing that Bonni spent some time on. So she explained how she had to understand the process of self-publishing by herself, bit by bit, right, Crystal? So she basically dived into that process. How did that look like for her? And at some point, she gives suggestions to our listeners. She said, basically, give yourself some time, especially if it's your first time again, and write down every single thing, every part of the process. Put everything in a document, something like you can write it down, you can create a Word file. It doesn't really matter. But what's important, what's empowering is that something like self-publishing is very complicated. And we said that more than once, it's not for the faint of heart. And if you can save yourself some time the next time that you have to launch a book, for example, and you check the first time which promo site worked best, or how did it look like the process of sharing your launch on social media? What did you do on Reddit? Which were maybe the subreddit that you use to make people aware that your book was out? What are the things that worked for you? And again, this can work for the publishing side of things, but also on the promotion side of things. So I really found, Crystal, that was super helpful because it's her experience laid down in front of your eyes. And Bonni, she's basically saying, what I have been doing and what I wish I would have done a bit better was the documenting side of things. And Crystal, I know that you are really big on this. You are almost crazy about these kind of things, and you're making me more crazy because now I have more of your point of view on this subject. But it's really true. With self-publishing, you have to deal with different kind of things, and the more you are systematically organizing your content, the less time you're going to invest in the future, because it's not just a book, it's many books, one after the other, and again and again and again. And I want to know your opinion on that, Crystal, if that resonated with you too. And actually, I want to know, how do you go on that process? Like, what do you do to document the steps? And if you have some suggestions for the listeners on that side.
I have it's probably 100-item checklist for publishing a book that's broken down into the different stages, which I actually have shared. So I will make that available as a resource for you from the strategicauthorpreneur.com website. So you'll be able to actually download that checklist, and you can delete the stuff I have on it, put your own stuff on it, make it yours. But it's helpful to have that kind of overview to know what you could be doing. You do not have to do all of the things. Some of the things are what you just layer in as you get more comfortable with the process. Each time you can kind of decide for yourself when you do your reflect and evolve stage of what you're going to eliminate and what you're going to keep. And the other thing that I actually was revisiting this week, which is related to this, is a book that I wrote in 2010 called Self-Publishing for Profit. And it breaks down all of the steps of indie publishing and walks you through with your turn exercises. And it's called Strategic Authorpreneur now. So it's a revised, updated, reformulated thing, but it will walk you through all of the stages of self-publishing. So one of the things that it covers, and I talk about this also in Strategic Series Author, is that you really do need to organize your files. Because when I went back looking through these book files, I mean, this book was published 10 years ago. It's up there, it's getting on. And I had to dig through all my files and find, okay, which version was the most recent one. And my past self wasn't quite as organized about my file labeling. So it took me a bit longer than it needed to figure out which was the most current file and where were the editable formats as opposed to the final PDFs. And so the way that I handle that now is that I have a really regular set of folders that goes into each book folder. And that is drafts from the writing process. And I do save as and then start working for all the major revisions. And then I will have a version as well as a date. So if I'm working on version, let's say it's version 3 of the full-time author book that Eileen and I are writing together, then that one will be version 3, but it might have a date of, July 15th. And then I might bounce it back to Eileen for her to add some more stuff. And so that might be version 3, July 20th, right? And so we only go to a new version when there's something substantially different, but we make sure that our date orders are all consistent so we can tell which is the most up-to-date one. Because if you just find that you might use version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, but you don't necessarily remember, was there a version 5? Did you get a version 5 and 6 that just aren't in this folder? And what were the dates on that? And which is the right file, especially when you're collaborating with someone else. You need to have agreed on a very specific file structure. So having the same folders and the same naming conventions, I find to be really helpful in keeping things organized and really helping me to understand how all of that is coming together and which files are the ones that I want to be working on. It also helps then if you're sending it to an editor, then their changes come back and you can say, okay, this is version 3 with a date, and then, Amanda edits at the end of it. For me, that's how I do that, so that the files all sort by file name appropriately and then sort by date. So you want to have your book title and then the version and then the date and then any sort of identifiers at the end, if it's somebody's feedback or maybe it's beta readers' feedback or whatever it is, that gets tacked on the end. And a strategy for date usage is if you put the year, so we would say 2020, and then the month would be 07, and the date would be 15, then it's going to auto sort from most recent to oldest, right? And the one at the top is always going to be the current one. Or if you switch it in the other way, it's going to auto sort itself appropriately though. So you don't have to visually scan through all of those files to see which one is current. And it's very tempting to use June 30th, and then you end up with a slightly different format and different punctuation and different everything. And then nothing auto sorts and it's hard to find things. So be ridiculously specific in your file naming so that your search functions all work really well, and be really consistent. I actually have a cheat sheet that I use for my file naming structure, and I used that for months before it was just automatic. And then now it's all burned in my brain, so I know how that works. But just making sure that you're reviewing that is really helpful.
That's, you see, I just learned a new thing. I was like, geez, I've been doing it wrong for a long time. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, like make your life easy. There was another thing that Bonni said in the interview, a takeaway. She had to go through this process by herself, but at some point she said, I will not have been able to do this the way I did without the community. And in her case, the community was the Creative Academy, which both of us have the fortune to be part of. There is something fundamentally wrong in a writer saying this book is just something that I did. I do believe it's always a collaborative effort, and we've been talking about this a lot, even when we interviewed April. It's not something only yours, especially when it's on the other side of the fence and you finished with it. What Bonni was hinting at when she was talking about the community is really that you do not have to reinvent the wheel. There are so many things that you can save time on, and it's really important for you to understand what is that you can do by yourself and what you can delegate. And if you can delegate, and if you can be helped by a community of other writers or authors, please do so. Do yourself a favor so that you can invest more time to your own story or things that you are strong on. And she was mentioning, for example, she was not able to do a cover by herself. So she had that website, 100 covers, if I'm not mistaken. And she said, I can't do that, but I know how to do other things. It was a process, what Bonni described. And she made sure to tell us what she did by herself and what she delegated. But again, the community part, I think it's very important, Crystal, because like I've been part of several community, but relatively recently, I have to say. And before, like I really felt like a lone wolf. I was just me, then there was my computer, my laptop, and I was typing and there were stories. But I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying it's more fun if you share the experience with people that are alone also and are typing on that laptop. You can share the experience, and I'm sure that your book, your stories are going to be better because of that. And I'm really curious to know what you think of that point, like the community. How can a community help author or a writer going indie, but also with the legacy publishing? What do you think of this? You've been basically on both sides of the fence, both words.
I think, yeah, as you said, it is possible to kind of plow through and try to do it by yourself, but it's expensive because you don't learn from anyone else's mistakes. You have to make all your own, and often that comes with a price tag attached. It's also unnecessary, and you can really waste a lot of time that isn't necessary at all. In discussing it with other people, in finding out what worked for other people, it just means you can bypass so much of the testing. You're still going to have to tweak it a little bit, but it's the idea of standing on the shoulders of giants, right? You can, and that's probably, I don't know, that might be a weird English expression you haven't heard before, but it's that, if you come into an industry or into a community where a lot of the groundwork has already been done to figure out the basics, you can start at the level of already having a good grounding in all those basics, and then you can add to that and you can grow past that. So it's hugely beneficial to be working on something from a place of experience and taking advantage of what everyone else around you has learned. So I think definitely everyone should have a community of people that they can draw on their experience, and you can choose exactly what format that takes. It may be that your community involves listening to other podcasts of folks in the industry who are doing these things. It may be watching YouTube videos. It may be reading books on how to do writerly things. It doesn't matter how you put that together, but having some actual interaction with other people in the moment also tends to be really current, up-to-date information of people who are actually doing the thing right then and there. And it is just nice to have the emotional support. My psychologist self did, that's what my master's degree was, and my thesis was all about social support. So it's no surprise to anybody who knows that forming communities has been a huge part of what I've been passionate about over the last 20 years in the writing world. I really have been focused around creating those spaces and helping make sure that people don't have to go through any of that alone, which is why the Creative Academy exists. So come on over and hang out with us. There's a link in the show notes for you to come join us. Well, the time has come.
Is that time?
For the curious jar, indeed. So, lid off the jar, arm in the bucket. What do you want? Tell me when to stop.
Go now.
Oh man. Okay, the green ones traditionally have been extremely difficult. So let's just see here. Oh, okay. This is a fun one. The last two green ones were like heart-wrenchingly emotional and existential sort of things. This one, would you call yourself a plotter or a pantser?
Oh, I love this question. I love it. I already have an answer. I don't know about you, but ladies first always. I don't know if that's something that holds on this side of the Atlantic, or what do you do here in Canada?
I write romance novels, so there's a certain amount of that's all good. We like gentlemen with manners.
Okay, so
so I am a planter or a plotter, depending. Yeah, I think I'm kind of a mixture. I will plot high level. I need to know who the characters are. I need to know what the central conflicts are. I need to have a rough vision of where the scenes kind of take place. And so I tend to use, lately I've been using Plotter. I used to use actual note cards, and then I was using the Corkboard and Scrivener. And now I've been using Plotter actually for the last few weeks to help me outline, because it has effectively the Corkboard process, but you can load beats into it. So I've been finding that really helpful. So I will plot the beats and where I think the scenes take place, and maybe a sentence or two about what I think happens in that scene. And then I make sure I know my characters really well. And then I do what some people refer to as discovery writing or pantsing. Yeah, I definitely do the overarching structure, and then I will just kind of follow the story. And I will often find out all kinds of crazy things about my characters, and the details that pop out are really fun. But if I know how it all goes, I'm bored with it and I don't write the story. So I need to make sure that even though I can kind of see the framework in my mind, I don't actually know everything that happens. Otherwise, I'll probably never finish it. And how about you?
That was amazing. I've been doing the writing challenges stuff, so I'm a bit more confident answering that question now. But before this challenge, really, I didn't really know what a pantser was, if I have to be very true with you. So I'll tell you a true story. I have been trying to plot my stories, 6 of them right now, and I've failed majestically. So I'll tell you again, I'm working on the 7th story of my challenge, right, Crystal? And I was like, this month I will write a science fiction story set in a post-apocalyptic world where people are living in a desert planet, and there is this guy that has a bionic arm, and people hate him for some reason. This guy has a past, and it's very dark, and there is something that is going to be found out at the end. Okay, so that was my basically more or less plot of the story. I started writing, and I came up with a completely different story that has nothing to do with this character and the plot. It's a story about the god slayer, somebody that kills gods for a living. So it's a completely different genre. It's a completely different main character, different time period. And so I've learned that at least at this phase of my writing life, I am, I would say, 90% discovery writer. So I will just sit and I will write something. And at the end of it, when I think that thing is more or less done, I will say, okay, I have some kind of matter. I just need to shape it now. And it's super painful. And I a bit envy you because you kind of have figured out the process. And I don't know if it's a process that can be applied to me or not, or if I'm just too immature and I can't just do it. I can't sit down and plot something. But it's just, I know that if I have to write a story, it's going to be painful in that regard, that I will write several different things, and probably 70% of what I write, what I free write, because it's usually free writing, will not go in the last version of the story. But it's just in this time and moment in my life is the way I craft stories. And I was reminded of something Brandon Sanderson said in one of his classes, and it was like, yes, there are these two kind of category: the discovery writer, the pantser, and then there is the plotter or the architect, as George Martin would call them. And most of the people are in between kind of thing. And something that is interesting, he said, in my opinion, Brandon Sanderson said, usually discovery writer build better characters, more interesting characters, but plotter have a better ending because they have figured that out. And I was like, that's super interesting, but at the same time, I want to make sure that my ending is good. So I guess I need to rewrite the character and the plot in order to uniform my story to the vision that I wanted to have. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but I would say now I am a discovery writer more than anything else. I might change in the future, but yeah, that was a fun question.
All right, we need some more questions for our Curious Jar. So if you have a question, you can email us ideas@strategicauthorpreneur.com and we will add it into the mix. And we would also love to hear your answers to the Curious Jar questions. So please share that with us in the comments below, wherever you are watching or listening to this podcast.
And as always, for show notes, links to resources that we mention, and coupons or discounts on the tools that we love, you can visit us at strategicauthorpreneur.com.
Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our next episode, as next week we'll be taking an in-depth look at data-driven decision-making for authors. Until then, we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so no, they're not the same thing at all. The emotion thesaurus is all about like how to visually show physical signals of emotions and like what the body language is that goes with them. That's the blue one. Mm-hmm. The red one is the emotional wound thesaurus, which is all reflecty and weird. So this one is all about what is like the hole in their soul. So,
the hole in their soul.
Have you heard that term before?
The hole.
No? Okay, so your character needs like an arc. You need to go from kind of broken to fixed in some way, right? You need to change, grow, learn, whatever. And most people are driven by some sort of basically psychological trauma that has happened or some sort of defining event. And so this is all different defining events. Like this one is being unfairly blamed for someone's death.
Wow.
And so there's all kinds of different ways that can manifest and ways that can kind of influence the person you become and create problems in your life. And this, I have one for each of my characters.
But
they
that
get a
doesn't
different
come with
hole
the
in the
book,
soul.
those placeholders?
The tabs don't come with the book.
Yeah,
No, those are
my
my labels.
Okay. Wow.
No, but before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about what.
Well, if you're still here, then let's go ahead and get you going. Here's a writing prompt for you. So start with the phrase, I don't remember, and write for a page. Go.